Okay, well, welcome back to Adding Worthington. We've been putting the world to rights off mic, but we thought we might start with the political tsunami, if that's what it was, of the Keir Starmer, the movie, which is now in its first reel. 7 out of 10, see me after class?
Well, hi Andy,
Hi.
and nice to talk to you again.
Oh, likewise.
As always. And I mean, what an interesting time in British politics.
As the old Chinese curse says.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we're now. Is it really just over a week since the election?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So the first thing that I felt, and talking to people that I know, this is what they felt as well, was the relief and not any longer having to put up with these really cruel people who had been throwing their weight around pointlessly, horribly, for years. The Tories.
The nasty party reborn.
The nasty party reborn in a nastier way than probably ever before. And my subtext to that was that it was interesting how pretty much all of this was down to Brexit, as what happened to Britain since Brexit. And that the Tory party increasingly had divorced itself from any notion that it should govern. What government have we actually had over these last 8 years? What we've had is increasingly people who felt that Britain was a tabula rasa, a completely blank slate after Brexit, on which they could project any fantasy they wanted about what they thought the country should be, as though we not only turned our back on 43 years of shared EU laws and rules, but that actually the whole of British history could be rewritten now. I think that was absolutely monstrous and not properly acknowledged. And then the other thing, of course, is that they chose to focus on racism and xenophobia, anti-immigrant sentiment,
In the form of
Islamophobia,
and the past at the Home Office.
the whole farce of that, as though they could. That's all they needed to do to govern was to try and stop a single asylum seeker coming to the UK, which wasn't going to work anyway.
Yeah. And that's sort of the first thing that's gone, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's partly gone.
It's partly gone, and it's going to be a difficult one to address. Obviously, the lowest hanging fruit was Rwanda. That was just such an abominable idea in the first place, that you would send asylum seekers, refugees, on a one-way trip to Rwanda. That's not right at all.
And some would say, as you say, a fantasy that was entirely designed to maintain the popularity of the party rather than something that was practically workable.
Yeah, and which I think it's turned out, it's been established that it didn't establish the popularity for the party. I think there is a limit to the number of people in this country who are, foaming at the mouth, obsessed with immigration. We must keep people out. And I don't know what percentage that is. I think we can certainly say that 14% of the people who could be bothered to vote made that clear because they voted for the Reform Party. But it's a minority of the people, and that's a good sign about the fact that decency exists amongst the majority of the British population. Because all of these things were isolated as though Britain was under a kind of unique threat of people coming from elsewhere, when richer countries everywhere attract people who are in desperate need of leaving the place that is no longer safe for them. Yeah. And actually, it's not as though they're all coming to Britain. They're going to countries like Germany in much more significant numbers. So we haven't been able to properly address what immigration is and what it should be. And one of the things that immigration is that people come to other countries not just to escape where they've been, but because the countries receiving them need workers to do jobs for which there are vacancies. That's clearly been the case in Britain since Brexit, is that all kinds of sectors of the economy have been decimated when it comes to workers.
As with Windrush after the war, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're still not even having a grown-up conversation about that, but maybe we will end up doing it. But in the meantime, the Tories' performative cruelty, which is what most of it was designed... they wanted Rwanda to put people off, as though somebody... out there somewhere around the world who wants to get away and has decided Britain as a place is going to be put off. They're not. Also, another way they tried to put people off was by failing to process asylum claims. This is something Labour's inherited, and they're going to have to deal with it. You don't... if the message was, we'll put you off by breaking our own system and drowning in the economic cost of not dealing with people's claims, none of that really makes any sense. And so, we've got this backlog of, it's still way over 100,000 people.
I was myself in a small way in the thick of it a few years ago, talking about modern slavery and people being cooped up in shoeboxes, trying not to go stir crazy.
Yeah.
For no good reason.
And all of it's appalling.
Underpaid
because,
lawyers. Yeah.
Statistically, the average is that 70% of people who are applying for asylum, it turns out that they are legitimately refugees. So that's the first thing to note, is you're not dealing with a system of a whole load of lying chances.
Yeah.
Statistically, over time, it's been 2/3 of people are genuinely refugees. Also, let's do away with this whole sponger mentality, shall we? Because what immigrants do is they want to work hard. And they want to belong in the place that they are.
Incredibly resourceful people.
Historically, this is also the case.
Yes.
That loads of people who are proud to be British now, are from an immigrant background, came here, got on with it, worked hard, did their best to...
The very thing some of these politicians, the Bravermans and the Sunaks, claim to embody.
Yeah.
Can I just pause it there and see where that piece of... optical history, as it were, in politics relates to what Starmer's inheritance is, because like many a Labour Party before him, there's a bit of gung-ho about law and order, and respect is his key word, isn't it? Which was Galloway's a few years ago, I think. Anyway, he's got it now. What's he going to do with it? I mean, and how does the echo of all this, how will it play in the kind of Britain that we will find ourselves living in over the next 5 years?
I don't know is probably the short answer to that. I'm slightly worried that how much of a law and order person he appears to be. I mean, and that's partly because one of my great interests is civil liberties.
Former director of public prosecutions.
Yeah, rather than a defence lawyer. I mean, if you at some level, that's really deeply shocking to me that we got a prosecutor rather than a defence lawyer as our Prime Minister.
That's a heady thought when you think about it, isn't it?
But, they've inherited...
the Public Order Act. And
some extremely punitive laws over the last few years that were put through by this most wretched of Tory administrations. And... are they going to repeal them, I think, is an important question. And particularly about the clampdown on protest and the clampdown on protests that was specifically directed at climate protesters. So I don't know whether everybody knows, but over the last couple of weeks there's been a trial in Southwark Crown Court of 5 people who were allegedly the ringleaders of the plan to shut down the M25 in 2022. The whole story is really darkly farcical. The judge has not wanted them to talk about why they did it. That they're doing this because of the very real scientific evidence of catastrophic climate collapse, and they tried to ban them from doing that. And kept having to arrest them in court and have them removed when they did try and talk about it.
Yes.
And the UN rapporteur for the freedom of environmental protesters came to the court because he's extremely alarmed at how, from what he can tell, globally, although there's quite a lot of frontline evidence of extraordinarily punitive policing of climate protest, no one has gone anywhere near Britain in the punitive imposition of prison sentences on peaceful environmental protesters. So these are people who have not been engaged in violent actions. They're disrupting things, but these are peaceful protests fundamentally. And so he turned up at the court because he's written about it, he's submitted things to the government, he's deeply shocked about what's happened. And in the end, the judge, who also arrested people who were sitting outside the courtroom with signs saying that juries should be allowed to hear what the basis is of why the people are on trial, the jury was, told not to take into account the reasons for these protests and has found them all guilty. And the judge has now promised to give them, long prison sentences, all based on, a Zoom call that they took part in to arrange peaceful but disruptive environmental protests. Is Keir Starmer going to leave all of this mechanism in place? And, my fear is that as this, prosecuting authoritarian, he has this belief that that of course we tolerate protest, but only so long as it doesn't do anything.
Yes, that's an extraordinary paradox, isn't it? And I suppose if that were a metaphor for a government that is perhaps receptive and listening, or not, that's quite powerful.
Well, I do hope the fact that he was a lawyer, that he will pay attention to people who will undoubtedly be putting the point of view that it isn't just enough to tolerate the notion of protest. You have to accept that protest will inconvenience people. And, and one of the things that I think everyone's been very, very careful about not exposing too much to the government in recent years has been to point out the analogy of the suffragettes and what the suffragettes did, which no one now says, oh, they shouldn't have been doing that. I mean, if they wanted the vote, they should have just, waited? The direct action that was undertaken by suffragettes would have them all banged up as terrorists now. People need to be thinking, well, wait a minute, what they were doing then is what the climate activists are trying to do now. And, we need to open up this discussion about what is happening and why.
Yeah.
Why are people protesting in this way? Why are they being clamped down on so violently when obviously the people they're complaining about, the oil and gas companies that are responsible for all of this, aren't being touched at all?
Yeah. It's a curious thing, isn't it? I mean, the political turmoil in France, but there's no prospect, although there's been a lot of bashing of refugees, really, under Macron, hasn't there? There's been very little attempt to ban protest, to police it rather heavily, certainly, perhaps rather more heavily than hitherto over here.
Yeah.
But now we're in a situation where perhaps there's almost a revolution recently in the air with Mélenchon in the sort of back end of things, National Rally sort of on the back foot, who nearly got over the line. But that concerted action and the events like this in the context of the wider Europe, to which Biden is suggesting Starmer might a little more closely adhere. Do you see that panning out? And what would be the influence on us and our expectations?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so much is up in the air, isn't it? When it comes to defence, I have issues with the power of NATO and its intentions and what's happening with Russia. I would much rather have people trying to work out how this can reach a peaceful conclusion rather than the endless war drifting into a potential World War III scenario that we seem to be getting into.
Starmer's first international call, really, wasn't it? The NATO summit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And also, he has to date been remarkably quiet on Gaza. A school was bombed in Russia and the government is there offering their sympathies. At the same time, that a school in Gaza that was sheltering displaced people was bombed, and kids playing football were killed. So the hypocrisy is already immediately in place. And, you know, I'm worried about that. I'm worried about Starmer's background on this. I'm worried about the fact that the week after the October 7th attacks, he publicly on British radio said that Israel had the right to withhold food, water and fuel from the Palestinian population.
Take a breath when he said that.
Well, it's a war crime, and he should know that. The only interesting thing, Andy, is that he has appointed an independent human rights lawyer from outside government to be the Attorney General, the job that Emily Thornberry thought she was going to get.
Indeed.
This is a man that Keir Starmer knows well. They've worked together professionally in their lawyer work over the years. He is Jewish. He is also critical of Israel's behaviour. And a few weeks after Keir Starmer made that terrible pronouncement on LBC, he and other lawyers went public with their complaints about Israel and the requirement for Israel to observe international humanitarian law, in which he said the exact opposite of what Keir Starmer had said. He said that this is in a siege scenario, which is what's been happening in Gaza since October the 7th. In the siege situation, cutting off desperately needed humanitarian supplies of all kinds to a civilian population, the lawyers all said it's almost inconceivable that this could be within the bounds of international humanitarian law. So he has appointed as his senior legal advisor somebody who recognises the law. And I don't know whether he only speaks when he's asked to, or how much he will be providing advice unsolicited to the government. But if it doesn't lead to some kind of change in the position, to have the UK, if you like, to have the UK as a leader on criticising Israel's crimes, then something will have gone wrong. But his appointment definitely suggests that there is a place for that, and there's a recognition of it at some level.
I was talking to Leonie Cooper on the newsroom the other day, and she has concerns about the fact that there are Israeli defence manufacturing plants in the UK, which of course these various protest groups have targeted. So there are nuances of opinion going on here. But so you're beginning to see the tectonic plates potentially shifting a little bit?
I hope so. I mean, you know, it's also this has been going on for, what are we in now? We're in the 10th month of something so grotesque, Andy, that none of us have ever seen anything like it. It's still being justified by a messianic regime that, you know, in the heart of it is Netanyahu. In some ways, you know, who can say what he believes and how much it's opportunism. I mean, I don't mean that he has any concern for the lives of Palestinians. I think he doesn't.
Yeah.
But he's a political opportunist. Yeah. But what he's leading is a government that contains fanatical, genocidal, messianic settlers who openly want the extermination of the entire Palestinian people. We shouldn't be doing business of any kind with these kinds of people.
Of course, I guess one of the reasons that Netanyahu is where he is that he managed to get off the imminent nature of those fraud charges he was very nearly facing before they attempted the reset of the judiciary.
Yeah, which you know, I regularly see commentary about how he needs to carry on clinging on to power because otherwise he's going to face the music for this.
Yeah,
so
sure.
You know, is this all down to the fact that this is the only way that he can evade?
It's all got a bit messy to say the least.
It's horrific.
Yes, yeah. But the implication is that there are very small minds behind all this, really, aren't there? It comes down to it, you know, and seeing human lives in terms of a sort of pathological accountancy.
Yeah, I mean, I do genuinely I know we spoke about this months ago, but I genuinely am shocked at the extent to which the major Western powers have provided unconditional support for something that involves the willful slaughter of civilians for nothing more than their nationality and their geography. It's not justifiable. The scale of civilian slaughter is just not just. There's no military necessity. And Israel has lied repeatedly about. I just saw today actually. Another massacre took place in Khan Yunis where they bombed a location full of civilians. 60 died instantly. Over 160 people died. Just one attack.
Yeah.
Over 100 people injured, and the report that I read about it from a Palestinian expert was this is the 16th attack that they've undertaken, which they have alleged is seeking out one of the main Hamas leaders. Each time they massacre civilians in vast numbers, and they say that they're targeting this guy, and then afterwards they go, oh, he wasn't there.
Yes, drone technology, in sinister as many people feel it is supposed to be far more of a precision exercise than it is proving to be. Because
they're not actually, that's not what they're actually about anymore. Yeah. Because nobody's held them to account. So really what it is that every step of the way, when the West had the power to hold them to account, they haven't. In fact, they've done the opposite. They've have more weapons. And they're not sending them precision weapons here. They're sending them 2,000-pound bunker busters. All the weapons that they're sending them, none of them should be used in an urban context. I understand that the Israelis in particular, and actually part of this involves Elbit, which is the company in Britain,
yes,
it's been successfully shut down in so many locations by campaigners. But some of their technology is involved in the missiles that are fired from drones. Just a couple of days ago, I saw the report in The Guardian, maybe it was reported elsewhere, the reports of Western doctors who'd been in Gaza who were talking about the absolutely shocking amount of injuries caused by these weapons.
Secondary injuries as well, you were saying earlier on, as in that report in The Lancet, the magazine for, the academic magazine for doctors.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's been coming out is fragmentation bombs. So these are weapons that are made in Israel. They're being fired by drones, and when they explode, the damage is not just the damage of the bomb. They're filled with tungsten balls and ball bearings, which cause just horrendous damage. And these are doctors who'd seen this happening to all the kids that were coming into the hospitals. So, yeah. I mean, the thing you were making mention of was with the secondary killings was this letter to the Lancet that just came out a few days ago from medical experts who have finally, for the first time within the medical community, I think, since October the 7th, pointed out that we shouldn't just look at the number of people who've directly been killed by what Israel's been doing, but the secondary deaths, which are caused by collapse of healthcare facilities, no food, no water, communicable diseases, all the stuff that is very much happening in Gaza, and they're very deliberately engineered by the Israeli government as well. Historically, it's been analysed. The minimum multiplier from direct deaths to indirect deaths is 3 times, but it could be as much as 15 times. So the headline that came out was that they suggested that this will end up, if it stopped tomorrow, this would end up with 186,000 people dead in Gaza, but it could be many more.
Yeah, sobering times. Could we talk about Ukraine a little at the moment, and perhaps compare and contrast?
Well, I'm shocked by the hypocrisy, I have to say, Andy. I noticed after October 7th that the West largely went quiet on Ukraine for a couple of months, because they had to have known that everything that they said about Russia they were not saying about Israel. And, eventually they got over that. And then they, started reporting as they carried on doing, which is that, the one side can do no wrong and the other side can do no right. And I don't know how they get away with the hypocrisy. I don't. But, my issue with Ukraine, which appears to be very contentious, is that I read foreign policy experts in that part of the world talking about how Putin had laid red lines down about NATO expansion over the years, and NATO has repeatedly crossed those red lines. So he did what he said he was going to do at the end of the day. It looks to me as though the Ukrainian men who are fighting are being slaughtered in huge numbers for a dream of their liberation, which is actually what the West wants and NATO wants as part of a bigger war to try and destroy Putin and Russia completely, which is not going to happen. And as in all conflicts, to be honest, Andy, I'm there from quite early on going, when are you going to sit down at a table and negotiate an end to this? That's how conflicts end. That's how grown-ups resolve conflicts in the end. And we appear to have no grown-ups in the room anymore. It's warmongers on all sides. And I don't know what. I think psychologically what's happened is that our leaders, not the really stupid ones, the really stupid ones deny that climate collapse is real. But the ones who aren't really stupid know that that we're kind of in the end times, and instead of responding to it responsibly, they've done that old human thing of just getting warmongering instead. They've gone crazy for war instead, and they're all actually quite deranged. But no one wants to talk about it.
So you're with police hero John Lennon on this, really. As I said, there's a lot of insanity in the room, codified.
Yeah, I really do think. I mean, something's happened, hasn't it? I mean, you've got like Ursula von der Leyen touring around nuclear bunkers in Northern Europe, saying we're going to need these everywhere. It's like, I'm sorry, what on earth has happened?
Yeah.
When the EU is in a position to say, can we talk about peace? Can we talk about bringing an end? No one's allowed to talk about that. It's heresy to talk about that. In the same way that no one will do anything to stop the slaughter in Gaza. No one is doing anything to Israel. No one is stopping a single weapons shipment. It's a world turned upside down. It's really, profoundly shocking.
In another part of the forest, Jeremy Corbyn elected as an independent Labour MP.
Yeah.
Diane Abbott's still in there, presumably passing notes to each other as they did rather more romantically years ago. Stuff under the desk. But he's now talking about the prospect as truth and justice perhaps becoming a little politicised. What do you see the future of the left being again under a Starmer government, needling as it is from within? A few of the usual suspects have found their way in, but do you see the movement that is environmentally conscious evinced by this partial success of the Greens, for example, but also where the left might go with this sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, just briefly to congratulate Jeremy Corbyn on his victory. Labour, Starmer poured resources into Islington North to try and defeat him. And what a hopeless task. I mean, how did they not know how popular he is as a local MP? And it was a resounding victory for him. He secured a much better victory than Keir Starmer secured in his home constituency.
Indeed, Feinstein,
where his vote halved.
Challenge there,
The key to all of the issues that we have now with the left, and theoretically it looks to me more hopeful than it ever has on paper. This is based on the number of people who voted in our elections, but unfortunately that isn't matched by proportional representation. So the problem that we have is that we now live in a country, in England, with 5 significant political parties, but only 2 of them have the lion's share of power because of first past the post. So, you know, it's ridiculous that Labour got such a huge landslide majority just because the Tory vote collapsed and Reform divided the rest of it. They did that on less votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017, 2019. And we keep, occasionally, you know, years go by where nothing really changes when we have an election. And occasionally you'll get a seismic shift because of a drift of opinion, and first past the post is so unrepresentative.
You would tolerate a surge in reform pro tem, as Davey was saying, in the course of
you'd have to do that. That would be the cost of a proportional and fair system. So just to explain on that one, I mean, in this election, it turns out that the Liberal Democrats more or less proportionally got the number of seats to reflect the number of votes, which certainly hasn't been the case for them for a long time. Their seats went up from 11 to 72. The Green Party, who more than doubled their vote, now had 2 million people voting for them, and got 4 MPs rather than 1. Under a proportional system, the Greens would have 42 MPs. Okay, and then the problem is that the bargain basement fascist Nigel Farage turns up belly aching at the last moment, sets up a private company that him and Tice pretend is a political party, somehow is allowed to get away with that, and scoops up more than 4 million votes, which means that, you know, they would have 80 odd seats in a representative system. But Andy, I have to say, I am 100% certain that those people would not get re-elected if they got these positions, because they would be useless MPs, because these are belly-aching, useless people who are not... These are not practical political people. They have no idea how they would implement any kind of policies that were practical if they got in. You know, they would... I mean, I think we saw it quite a few years ago, before Brexit. One of the first signs of the rise of the far right was that there were council elections where the BNP won over 1,000 council seats in the country. They all disappeared because these people were corrupt and useless. And
very good at fighting each other. I mean, Farage sacked Habib within hours, didn't he? Yeah.
So, to me, the answer for the left is that they haven't got enough representation now. They haven't got the representation based on what people voted for.
Yes.
If we had proportional representation, then the left of the Labour Party, who we will include in this, and the Greens and the Liberal Democrats hold much more power than they currently do, and would more crucially outnumber the Tories and Reform. So it's time that we had a grown-up conversation about it. But the problem that we always have is whichever one of the big 2 parties gets in, they sit there and go, why on earth would we change the voting system? We just won massively. And it's not a fair system.
Yeah, it's almost made for landslides, isn't it? And of course you can, as they do in America, almost on a nightly basis, gerrymander the constituencies.
Right, yeah.
So I'm wondering what form Corbyn's movement might take, in that, as you say, Reform is effectively a commercial organisation with its curious array of US backers, if I remember rightly. So where does Corbyn is antithetical to all that, but where does he get his resources from? Is people power going to win the day in a hard-pressed economy?
I don't know. I mean, I would say that what has been shown from this election is that independents, who are all on the left, but who are a loose collection of individuals, actually,
as in France, and,
provides the way forward. Not, because they would share the same politics as left-wing Labour MPs, for example, of which there are still dozens. There are still dozens of socialist group members in the Labour Party. You know, people like John McDonnell and Richard Bergen. And once I start going, I know of dozens. Andy,
it's quite a list and a
good people on the left.
Yeah.
Who are now hardly really not very different in their political perspective from the Green Party and from a lot of what the Lib Dems stand for. What's happened in certain noticeable locations, and there's a bit of a history of it, but it seems to me that it has more possibilities now, is that a local person who is capable of building support can take out one of the complacent big parties. And I am very sad that when it came to Ilford North, Wes Streeting managed to hold on to his seat by just over 500 votes, because Liane Mohammed was everything that he wasn't. This was a man who she was out on the streets in Ilford North from when when the election was announced.
Yes,
making friends with people, representing the community, and just a few more votes, and Wes Streeting would have lost his seat because of his complacency, I suggest. This kind of sense of entitlement. This is my constituency. I am entitled to this constituency.
Sorry, Anthony Trump, all that.
And you look at someone down on the ground who goes around and it's like, actually, I'm going to make it my mission to try and meet everyone who lives here and to suggest to them that I care about them and I'll do what I can for them.
Yeah.
That's the Jeremy Corbyn effect, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, again, in the day job, I remember him replying with astonishing zeal and speed and effect to a little local constituency issue I happened to raise. I thought, let's write to Jay, see what happens. Reply the following day, problem solved. He somehow made time for that. So as you say, he knows his local turf. Extraordinary man. Yeah. Another extraordinary man, Julian Assange. You being as passionate about civil liberties, no doubt it was a jubilant day, albeit through plea bargaining, that he got his freedom. I gather that from Varoufakis that his extradition order has not yet been rescinded, but he's over in Oz doing his thing. Do you think that his release actually bodes well for journalistic civil liberties? For example, those of yourself and your colleagues. I mean, and will this be tried on again?
Okay, so quite a lot in there.
Yeah.
It was an amazing thing to me and to many other supporters of freedom of the press that Julian's long ordeal in Belmarsh came to an end, and suddenly, almost overnight, he was a free man, having made the diversion to this US overseas territory, which I believe he insisted on. I believe that they wanted him to go to the US mainland itself to sign a plea deal, which I think he wisely refused.
Yeah, just in case they
could have been disappeared. And just fantastic news in a world in which we normally don't get good news regarding any of these kinds of issues, because there should never have been a prosecution case against Julian Assange. That's the important thing to remember. Julian Assange was not the whistleblower. That was Chelsea Manning. Julian Assange took receipt of classified documents from the US government, which he published with some of the world's major newspapers, with them. How can he be singled out? And they tried all their devious ways to suggest that actually he was a terrorist, and these legitimate news outlets are very different. But, that was not a winning argument. It was also idiotic to suggest that they would have a trial in the States which wouldn't put freedom of the press on trial. It was just, and eventually it all collapsed. And so, wonderfully, he has been freed. The problem for the future is that the plea deal required him to admit that receiving classified information from a source and publishing it was an infringement of the Espionage Act, rather than what he thought, which is what he said in his, when he admitted that when he issued his guilty plea, that he thought, actually, no, what happens when you receive classified information from somebody that it's in the public interest to know about? This is protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So, they sneakily got one little bit out of him at the end, which is troubling for press freedom as a whole, I would suggest. Well, we'll see where it goes from now on. But I think Julian's safe in Australia. I don't suppose he'll be travelling abroad. But, the man can start to hopefully try and rebuild his life. He's just turned 53. He's got his 2 kids that he, has barely seen. And he's escaped the trap, which I noticed from Guantanamo, which is that with these kind of things that they portray as high-profile cases and that take such a long time to reach any kind of judicial conclusion, they freeze people at the moment in time that their alleged wrongdoing took place.
Yeah.
A young Julian Assange, who was, who he did want to humiliate and take on the United States.
It was a maverick, wasn't he? Is, hopefully, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the man who he is now, after all those years of confinement, who is older with a family, he deserves that time to recover. But it is like in those cases, it's very different from having a trial, being sentenced, and having a prison sentence. At the end of which you could say, I've done that, I'm not the person I was then. It's this freezing of people in time, because that's the same with Guantanamo.
Yes.
This notion that
yes,
they pick up this person who's accused of involvement with terrorism, and it stays frozen in time.
And in your case, the assiduous reporting of this and monitoring of it is almost unique, globally speaking. But as you were saying earlier on, it is a sidebar in people's political concerns at the moment, but that it persists, and the possibility of this persists in a sort of post-Soviet kind of way.
Oh, it's horrendous. I mean, the latest thing that's happened, Andy, is that around the time, before October the 7th, or around the time of the October 7th attacks, the Biden administration was going to release a number of men who had been approved for release for years from Guantanamo. Was going to send them to Oman, which has taken in prisoners before, has proven to be a great place to send former Guantanamo prisoners. And then October 7th happened. And then the political optics of releasing men from Guantanamo meant that they just canned it. Well, it repeatedly happens with Guantanamo. It's not politically convenient to do anything about it. And it's like, this isn't about political convenience. The only reason you can make it about political convenience is because this is a fundamentally lawless place.
Yeah.
If the law applied, there would be judges saying, I don't really care about your political expediency. These people need to be freed. So, this horrible game has been going on for over 20 years.
It's an odd one. Given the fact that Biden is on the ropes here, it probably wouldn't have been a bad thing to do this as a diversionary tactic away from these weekly arms shipments. But somebody doesn't seem to have thought that was a good idea.
Well, no, the bottom line is that there's always at least half a dozen rabid, and I mean rabid, Islamophobic Republican MPs. Who would leap on him if they could find any justification for it.
Yeah, it's
and
before it's been talked about, hasn't it?
So sadly, before October the 7th, the kind of Islamophobia was at a low ebb. Now it's transformed. So I just hope that Biden is going to realise that he may not win in November, and that he should get these men out of Guantanamo before...
he still can.
If he doesn't win, they're sealed in there again for another 4 years, like they were in Trump's first term, and it's horrific.
And who knows what conditions they're enduring. Indeed. What do you think about Trump 2.0? Do you think it's on the cards, and how will the the political infrastructure survive it when it's being existentially challenged by what that so-called administration wants to do to it? But you're shaking your head pretty vehemently here.
Well, it's just a crazy situation. How is it possible that this man could be elected again? I mean, genuinely, how on earth is it possible, Andy? Yeah. I was in the States when he was inaugurated back in 2017. On the day of his inauguration, I switched on the TV where I was staying, and it was Stormy Daniels talking about Donald Trump and his weird little penis.
Yes.
On the day that he was about to be inaugurated as president. And in a moment, all satire was dead.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to matter. I don't know what it is about him. We had a glimpse of it in this country. It was Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
A man thoroughly without any values, somehow exerting a magnetic charm over people in significant numbers. I don't know why anyone would support him. But the reality that we have now is that, if for nothing else, Trump is driven by vengeance against anyone that he perceives has wronged him. Domestically, if he gets in, I think he will destroy America's institutions in pursuit of vengeance again. He will destroy the entire judiciary if he can. Which, that's out of a fascist playbook, which some of his advisors know. If you want fascism, first of all, you have to destroy an independent judiciary. Yeah. I think it's very, very troubling.
They barely have. I mean, because the incumbent party can appoint.
Yeah. So so can the Democrats win? Well, at the moment they have a man with an advancing mental collapse in a way that no one has really dealt with before. It's not in any of the manuals. It's not in the Constitution. Who doesn't want to stand down? And my God, they need to get rid of him, and they need to get rid of him really quickly and put in somebody with a fully functioning brain, who's competent, who's energetic, who can go out and take on Trump. A younger person who can just constantly go out there and say decent Americans, do not vote for this criminal. Talk and talk and talk. Tell people what plans they've got. And also, I would suggest, distance themselves from President Biden, who has shown himself incapable, for whatever reason, of challenging Benjamin Netanyahu in the slightest. This is not the history of the United States and America and Israel. However much, AIPAC and people have been manoeuvring for years to make sure that American politicians do what they want them to do. There is a history of US presidents being able, when things start looking really horrific, to say, actually, don't treat us like that we're just a machine for your service. This is a two-way relationship, and this is not acceptable what you're doing. And Joe Biden is incapable of that.
It's a curious thing, isn't it? Because you would think, with what has happened and the devastating humanitarian consequences and the moral consequences of Gaza, that it's going to be in the gift of somebody to say, hang on a minute at some point, however discreetly.
Yeah, no, but he ultimately he is the commander in chief. He's the leader.
Yeah.
I've read about people, within the administration going, there's no way to get to him and to get him to see the scale of it. And given his mental state, Andy, I mean, it's horrible. Repeatedly, he has talked about seeing photographs of atrocities that were committed on October the 7th that don't exist. Occasionally, White House staffers have had to say, the president did not see the photographs that he's telling you that he's seen, because as far as we know, they do not exist. But imagine someone whose brain is collapsing, fixated on something being real when it's not. And you can see when he clings to it, and when he's there, he's so angry, and the Palestinians deserve everything because of these things that they did, which they didn't do. The situation is ridiculous, but no one can take him down. He's the president.
incapacity in public office and the complexity. I mean, there's a thesis of that, really, isn't there? There could be a lot of it about. Sometimes after, the division bell, the lamb and flag or whatever, but we have a society with that's increasingly age aware, if not sort of age conscious, and politics that, as you say, demands a youthfulness and athleticism that can fast disappear when things are moving at the pace that they've been moving. I mean, anecdotally, Biden has been jetting around the world ahead of that disastrous TV campaign appearance, which in American terms is sort of very often break or break, isn't it? Because there are other fora in the public square.
Yeah. But I mean, he's got to go, hasn't he? I mean, everybody's like rigid and scared, looking at him, going, like, "What's he going to do?
By way of analogy, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn talking about doing politics differently, as politicians habitually do, but I think among those, he's probably the real deal. I think we would agree. But how would he, with advancing years, cope with that and still keep it local and still keep it real? I mean, how do you do it in the modern world?
What? Who? Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, generally speaking, but I'm thinking people of that experience and calibre who were needed. Sometimes they're booted up to the Lords in the hope of keeping them quiet. It doesn't always work, But I guess really with a leadership at a time when decrepitude seems to set in all the more readily.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there needs to be, some kind of test. Like I suspect there really ought to be a test for, like, as people get older, their right to drive a car, for example.
Yeah. Well, your licenses get taken away, don't they? That's a very pointed analogy. Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's maybe it's a modern.
Would you buy a used car from this man? Would you be driven by this man? It's the same analogy, really, isn't it?
As far as I know, we haven't had to deal with the situation. I mean, this isn't just Biden, this is Trump. I mean, Trump's brain is mush, isn't it?
Yeah.
We haven't had to deal with it.
Populist mush, though, isn't it? That's slightly. I mean, most of the people who vote for him seem to be moving in a mushy direction.
I mean, I think they're just projecting, or he manages to somehow put out keywords. It doesn't make sense, and it's never made sense. He's incoherent. I mean, he's really very fundamentally incoherent. And so the pair of them, I mean, it's humiliating for the states, isn't it?
It could be. I mean, Farage, Clacton-on-Sea, and those two sort of watching countdown. It's not an inconceivable scenario, is it? With perhaps the nuclear button just a few feet away.
Oh, yeah. Let's hope that's a long way away.
Oh, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Well, as ever, Andy, it's just brilliant to catch up. And so many loose ends I hope we can pick up again next time. Thank you so much.
That's been great, Andy. Thanks.
Cheers, likewise. Life-enhancing stuff.